In this episode, you'll be shocked to hear that my boat has problems. Also, I get 2 unpleasant surprises, and we might visit with Peter Suarez. So I think I may have mentioned at the end of episode 4 last season that my boat is deteriorating. I managed to get some new paint on the cabin top last summer during the blistering heat, but now she's got electrical issues. The zinc on my rather expensive Max Prop propeller has been disappearing at a rate of 1 per month, which is why I find myself at the storage unit picking up my snuba rig. It's probably at this point that a good podcast would throw in a little tip like, How Not to Sail 101. Your punch list will never get shorter. For the uninitiated, the punch list is the to-do list for your boat, so named because it makes you want to punch yourself in the head when you look at it. If I actually wrote them all down in an organized fashion, my punch list for JC Sails would have to have at least 50 items on it. But a few that come to mind are painting the cockpit, turning the freshwater pump right side up and replumbing and rewiring it, letting my friend Mike rebuild the engine raw water pump, fixing the raw water intake valve on the head, which is set to trickle no matter which position the handle's in. But perhaps the most troubling is the electrical situation. Not the rat's nest that is the wiring aboard JC Sails. Nope, I'm talking about the electricity in the water. It seems that when boats flock together in the marina, some of those that have less than stellar wiring contribute to what is essentially a large battery, with some boats being the donor electrodes and some being the recipient. I think it's called telekinetic photosynthesis or something like that. In most cases, it's not the kind of thing that would send you to the hospital or the morgue, but it can result in some of the important metal parts of your boat getting eaten away, which is why we have zincs. I have a donut-shaped piece of metal clamped around the prop shaft and a bullet-shaped piece of metal screwed into the hub right in the middle of the prop, either or both of which is supposed to protect my engine from corroding or my expensive Max Prop from turning into Swiss cheese. If you don't clean your hull yourself, whoever you hire to do that is usually the person that is responsible for changing the zincs. And the previous dive company let some damage happen to the Max Prop, which is why they are the previous dive company. The new dive company is reporting that the bullet-shaped zinc on the Max Prop is gone every month, which all of my friends in the know assure me is way, way, way too fast. If you deal with enough marine vendors, you'll develop a healthy paranoia. At least I consider it healthy. And I feel like it's past time to see things for myself. And so it is that I'm headed south with the hookah rig that I've used exactly once. In Season 1, Episode 1. Not sure if this is the last or second to last or third to last rest stop. But traffic sucks, so I'm gonna stretch. After a commute that is definitely longer and seems much more tiring than usual, I finally arrive at the marina well after dark. The water doesn't seem to be giving off sparks this trip, but the red tide outbreak is not far removed. And in the morning, I see that the water is an interesting reddish-brown color. It looks thick. Not necessarily something you'd want to immerse yourself in. But who knows what kind of shape the zincs are in, or what kind of havoc is being wreaked underneath the boat. So it's December. The water quality is unknown. I've never changed a zinc underwater before. And I've used this snuba rig exactly once, 2 years ago. What could possibly go wrong? How Not to Sail, Sponsored by our awesome Patreon patrons and Latitudes and Attitudes magazine. They ruin my life, so why not let them ruin yours today at latsats.com. This is a test. This is a test of the GoPro. This is only a test. At the crack of noon, the day after arriving, I look around for my wetsuit, weight belt, and all the other crap I haven't used lately. There's one of my old masks that's been hanging from the galley faucet for a while. Not sure if this is the vision-corrected mask or the regular one. We'll see. I assume it's the one I need, but it needs a little cleanup. I guess that's close enough. Alright, got my weight belt on. Let's put some lipstick on this pig. I don't have any goals for this dive other than to get in the water and have a look. And maybe get some GoPro footage. That's probably one too many things. Nonetheless, with Rick and Debbie watching and probably laughing from their cockpit across on the next pier, I waddle down the swim ladder and ease myself into the murky water. Before completely submerging my head, I take a minute to make sure that the regulator is working, and I'm totally not peeing right now. Okay, good to go. Underwater, the visibility is not good, and there's a lot of sediment or something. I keep a lookout for what Captain Bob Bitchin might refer to as the dreaded corn-backed trout, and Harbor Master Dennis might refer to as the blind mullet. Two species I definitely don't want to run into. So far, so good. I finally get oriented and make my way over to the prop. The prop zinc is there, albeit a little eroded. So I check the shaft for the shaft zinc. There's no frickin' shaft zinc whatsoever. Not a hint. Unless you count the little light-colored ring on the shaft, a few inches forward of the prop that seems to have less algae on it. I imagine that's probably where a zinc was. So that's interesting. Time to get out of the water and pay a friendly call to the hull cleaners. Yeah, it just seems odd to me that they came by 2 weeks ago to change the prop zinc and didn't notice that the shaft zinc was either entirely missing or like on its last legs. My rep at the hull cleaners floats the idea that perhaps the zinc eroded at the screws and fell off. They do that sometimes. Yeah, okay. I got you. All right. Appreciate it. We'll go with that this time, but I think I need to go buy a couple of shaft zincs and put one on myself. How hard can it be, anyway? At least Rick and Debbie weren't laughing at me from across on the next pier, which is probably good karma, because not long thereafter, they have their own little adventure.
All of a sudden, we weren't headed in the direction I thought we would be.
Rick and Debbie were headed out for a little sunset cruise with another couple.
I was out front doing my usual thing. I can't say I was clued in until we were almost running into your boat. It was like, oh, we're out of control here. That's when I knew it.
Rick and Debbie were backing out of their slip nicely into the space between our two piers, the helm to port, the stern turning to port. The next thing you'd typically want to do is turn the helm back to starboard and motor out between the two piers.
I'm turning the helm, and it's going straight back towards you.
Fortunately, Rick already knows how not to sail 101. It pays to be decisive, usually. And while I was standing there like a cow looking at an airplane,
I idled it forward. I said, we're going back in.
Now, the only direction that Rick and Debbie's boat wanted to go was to the left, and that only in direct proportion to how much power the helmsman gave her. And they had already drifted almost too far to starboard to get back into their slip. Fortunately, Rick made a quick decision to lean on the throttle.
just kind of lucky it went this way. And we're lucky there was no wind blowing me all over the place.
Rick is nothing if not modest.
Yeah, had you not been decisive with putting a nose back in here, you probably would have been on that Pearson behind you there.
Maybe.
After my detour to congratulate Rick on a job well done, I have another task on my punch list.
Yeah, I'm not ready to play this. But I'm glad that you made me relearn it.
As I mentioned way back in episode 2 in season 1, the first fella I usually run into at the marina is this guy.
Hey.
Yeah, man.
How you doing, man?
That was before he got all highfalutin and moved to the fancy pier. But Peter Suarez, a.k.a. Captain Pete, remains a font of nautical knowledge, except to the extent we find out otherwise later.
The water's not that bad. The difficulty about sailing is when you come into contact with the crunchy bits that surround the water.
Well said as always. And you can hear many of his different personalities in various episodes of How Not to Sail.
You ever seen like a backwoods creek? It's like some kind of crazy, god-awful shit brown. That's what we got. But I will say one thing, along with that comes an amazing bioluminescence.
With his musical skills and wicked sense of humor, I figure Peter's the perfect guy to call upon to help me get this episode out before New Year's. And so, later in the day, Peter and I get together in the cockpit of JC Sails, where somebody drank all my beers. It was mostly me.
It's really very similar to what I would imagine walking on a peg leg is like.
Okay.
Peter's just gotten his second ankle replacement, so now he has metal parts starboard and port.
That's my pull quote. It's kind of like a peg leg.
It is. It's kind of like a peg leg.
At high tide, the deck's sitting about a yard above the dock. I do not have any steps, and let's just say Peter is not exactly Wilt Chamberlain.
Very high tide.
Yeah, and thank you for setting up the steps.
Uh-huh.
That makes it a lot easier
Yeah, good luck with that.
to get on board.
It's not like you got a walking boot on or anything.
But eventually we get settled in the cockpit.
I just figured, like, I would rather knock this out. I mean, this high quality audio
Right.
content than to get to Monday or so and peter out, pardon the expression.
We haven't done much prep. Well, none really. And Peter hasn't had a chance to brush up on the 2 songs I'm itching to record. But I'm all for pressing forward rather than putting it off.
We can totally cut in if you feel like playing some tomorrow and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll just postpone the music making for now and focus on collecting a lot of us saying very profound and erudite things.
I noticed that I can actually pee now and it's not blue.
Yes. The red tide has definitely dissipated.
Although the water was kind of tea-colored when I got in it today to look at the frickin' zincs that aren't there.
Well, let's just say that you have your boat housed in a marina that probably has a tendency to kind of, just collect whatever it collects, which is mostly catfish and
Poop.
I was going to say rednecks, but we'll go with that.
So much for profound and erudite. We should probably steer this interview in a different direction.
I don't know exactly our first meeting, but it occurred when you brought your boat, Duende, into the slip that is right now 6 feet behind you to the starboard of JC here.
That's absolutely true. I was your next door neighbor for a while, and given that the experience that I accrued during that time, I moved to another pier.
Not that I was cranky or anything. In fact, if you listen back, I don't know, episode 19 or something, I got back from my trip from season 1, and I'm like, Peter's listening to a movie or something.
Anyway, Peter describes all the work he had to do on his boat, which leads us to a nautical bit of trivia and a wager.
Well, I came from having her on the hard down at Salt Creek. There were no stanchions. There was nothing from the deck up.
You motored in, you didn't get towed in.
No, we motored in. Yeah. Yeah, she had no sails flying yet, no.
And yeah, I don't know if you had spars on or what. Is a spar a boom or a mast or both? Maybe both.
You know, that's a very good question, because I always thought a spar was a cross.
See, I'm gonna say it's any freaking long piece of thing above deck, which would make it either the boom kind of thing or the boom and mast. I think those may be both spars.
I don't think that a vertical structure like a mast would be considered a spar.
All right, we got a little wager, $1. If it's vertical things too, I win $1.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, brother. So how long are you going to be down here this time?
Peter and I adjourned our interview after not having said too many profound or erudite things and running out of beer, but made plans to reconvene in a day or so to do the musical portion of the program.
I'm thinking if you're going to be here through, say, Tuesday, Wednesday, we could maybe grab some sushi and then take a look at those tunes you were interested in. Let me know. All right, later.
Meanwhile, there's another important item on the punch list to take care of.
Now we're getting in it. We're taking the alternator off.
Taking the alternator off so we can get to the zinc.
Turns out there's zincs all over this boat. There's 3 of them screwed into the engine, 2 of which haven't been changed since I bought the boat 10 years ago.
So what I understand you telling me is that you're occasionally supposed to change these zincs?
Yes.
Okay.
My buddy Mike is aboard to help me with the zincs and, more importantly, to remove and rebuild the engine water pump.
You want me to see if I can break these bolts loose?
Sure.
Okay.
Unfortunately, some of the bolts on the water pump and the zincs are a little stubborn, which is why Mike has brought what he calls the smoke wrench. That's right, a blowtorch.
Oh,
Don't worry, I have a fire extinguisher. But before we actually got to that part, we made yet another unfortunate discovery this trip. I may have mentioned that the ball valve on the raw water intake to the head is messed up.
I need a 5/16.
Okay.
But as it turns out, it's not alone. As Mike takes the hose off the intake side of the engine water pump,
Why is it flowing so much? That seacock's off, right?
It's supposed to be.
I'm sure it's fine.
Well, let's see if it stops.
It does not.
Son of a bitch.
Well, what a pain in the ass. The ball valve's gone.
Wow.
That's interesting, Bradford.
That's one word for it. Stay tuned next time when we'll learn whether or not the boat's still floating, whether I get together with Peter Suarez and whether he remembers his own songs, and who's right about that wager about spars. Thanks to our awesome Patreon patrons, thanks to Bob and Latitudes and Attitudes, and thanks to you for listening and for an awesome 2021.
Okay, then.
And by the way, if you've already heard all the How Not to Sail episodes, let me tell you about another great podcast by a friend of mine, just in case you haven't heard it. The Shooting the Breeze Sailing Podcast with Captain Jeffrey Weddick. Not because I'm a guest on episode 125 or anything, but because he's always a great listen. It's like sitting across from a good friend at the pub as he talks to a cool guest, and maybe they have a beer or two, metaphorically speaking. Who knows? And I mean, don't you want to have a beer with them? So check out the Shooting the Breeze Sailing Podcast at theescapepods.com. That's theescapepods.com, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode as well. Whenever I finish those. Thanks to Maxie Freeney for his awesome mixes all year. This is not one of them, so don't hold it against him. I'm looking forward to seeing you in 2022. The events and descriptions in this episode represent the editorial viewpoint of this person only and none other. Don't try any of the stupid stuff described here without consulting your psychologist, attorney, and/or a licensed captain. And I'll see you next time on How Not to Sail. Screwing up is part of cruising. Let me show you how.
Oh,